have mentioned before, I'm not a huge fan of player spells. If it's a monster or a villain that uses magic, I think it's a lot more fun to make up magic for villains and get creative, just to keep players guessing. I think it's kind of a little bit boring to use player spells against them. I mean, it's nice that they recognize them, but at the end of the day, you know, it's familiar. It doesn't feel as scary because you're like, okay, so he has, yeah, fireball is scary, but he has fireball. He probably is going to cast that once or twice, maybe. But if you start seeing spells that you've never heard of before, now you don't know what to expect from a villain, and that can be fun. Not interrupting at all. Any tips for big bad fights? Planning on using crystals that power the villain, if that affects the answer. It's fun when villains have interesting gimmicks, so that they're always different. Sounds like you've already got a good idea there with having crystals that power the villain. Obviously, um, you know, let's say there are 5 crystals. Well, the party now can attack those crystals, right, to weaken the defenses. And I might even consider different abilities that the villain has with or without those crystals. It's actually more interesting without. Like, it's sort of like creating an enemy where once they hit half health, it triggers extra abilities or triggers new stuff for them to do. Crystals could also do things when they shatter. You could get wild magic surges out of them, or if you're, burned out on something like that, the crystals could only appear to be crystals. They could actually be like crystalline constructs of some sort, and going to destroy them could just wake them up. And now you've maybe weakened the boss, but you've added a minion to the fight. And so, you've got to kind of weigh that, where it's like, would we rather they be stronger with these abilities, or do we take out these crystals and now we've got to fight more monsters along with the villain? You could also use crystals kind of like batteries, where they're being sort of charged up, increased or decreased, and that affects how they are. You could tie what the health of the crystals to like the health of the environment. Thinking of like, epic Uncharted, combat scenes where like the entire ship that you're fighting on is sinking. I don't even know if I think that's from one of the games. Or maybe the crystals are sort of tapping into different arcane energy planar stuff, and so damaging the crystals is actually going to shift the fight to different locations, right? Because it's almost like the entire dungeon boss room or whatever, wherever this is like glitching out and sending the group all over the place. Sometimes that can have an effect. Sometimes it's just for like a cool factor. If you have those types of players, think about villain loot, think about big bad loot, think about what if they are tempted to keep some of the crystal shards, what that might mean. And then in general, for villain fights, I would say that it can be really fun to try to find something, try to break a rule with a villain, depending on how big of a deal the fight is. If it's a mid dungeon battle or something like that, maybe not. But if this boss is meant to be memorable, if this villain is supposed to be memorable, it's kind of fun to find something and sort of break or bend a rule, because your party's going to notice. So, for instance, I still remember that. What's the fight in Critical Role where, which I never watched Critical Role, but I saw this clip going around so much, where it's like they're fighting Vecna, who has 2 ninth level spells, and everybody's like, "Wait a minute, 2 ninth level spells?" It's like, well, Vecna's a god. Vecna, you know, um, I think that, and we should do more of this on the channel. Actually had some ideas to try to focus in on this, because I think it'd be really fun to do more monster design, because I think it's a really rewarding process, and I think it can be really helpful. If you've ever looked up Matt Colville's video on action oriented monster design, or action oriented like stat block design, I think that's a really cool kind of thing to aim for in terms of like designing an encounter around the types of things that monsters can do. So recommend that video. Go look it up. Action-oriented monsters. There's you'll find it. Lair actions, special kind of triggers and stuff. I have mentioned before, I'm not a huge fan of player spells. If it's a monster or a villain that uses magic, I think it's a lot more fun to make up magic for villains and get creative, just to keep players guessing. I think it's kind of a little bit boring to use player spells against them. I mean, it's nice that they recognize them, but at the end of the day, it's familiar. It doesn't feel as scary because you're like, okay, so he has, yeah, fireball is scary, but he has fireball. He probably is going to cast that once or twice maybe. But if you start seeing spells that you've never heard of before, now you don't know what to expect from a villain, and that can be fun. Yeah, just some ideas. Hopefully some of that is helpful. And I need to plan some regular time. We've got a, in theory, I don't do it very often, but we've got a miniature painting, like a character stream, an NPC character design stream. I'd like a monster stat block type stream as well. And I have some ideas for that. But, so many ideas. So little time. We'll get to it here eventually. Not sure if a rule breaking one would fit my party since we're all new. Maybe breaking the crystals give a large surge of power before being destroyed. Yeah, that's cool. Or maybe there could be like a healing factor with the crystals too. You could just say, like, at the end of a round, you could say that the crystals seem to rejuvenate the villain, and maybe it's a D8 or a D10 for each crystal that's still around, and you roll those, and that gets added back to his health. You do that the first round, you do that, and the party is going to prioritize destroying those crystals over everything else. No question. Oh, that's nice, Silly. I'm glad. There's also a thing where, like, having people to talk through stuff. You could call it like Socratic method. You could call it, there's some sort of like crossing the barrier into your brain, like verbalizing things, or even like rubber ducking to an extent. If you ever heard that idea before, if you ever are struggling thinking through something, I don't know why people act like talking to yourself is strange. It's really not. If you put a rubber duck or something that you're going to treat this, that you're willing to talk to on your table, and you talk to it, for whatever reason, verbalizing our thoughts, verbalizing our problem solving, things get easier. Whether that's the fact that we're hearing it and not just thinking it, the fact that we have to slow down and actually turn things into words and complete sentences, and that we're talking, and it's almost like we're talking to ourselves. I feel like sometimes we can trick ourselves into thinking that just sitting and being in thought is the same as kind of talking to yourself, and I don't think it is. Could be some version of all of that too, but glad you find it helpful.